If you want to challenge your adventuring party with a landscape that demands respect, the mountains are hard to beat. Towering peaks, thin air, tempestuous weather, and treacherous passes. Mountains are both majestic and deadly. They can feel like the edge of the world, places of solitude, danger, and divine presence. In fantasy, mountains often represent permanence, mystery, and transcendence, the realm of gods, giants, and dragons. Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall, and welcome back to our thematic terrain series where we are exploring the different terrain types for our hex crawls and sandbox campaigns. In these videos, we break down each terrain's unique theme, features, and the types of monsters that call them home. So let's go ahead and start our climb for this week's episode on mountains. Before diving into mechanics or monsters, it's worth remembering that terrain in your sandbox can tell stories. Mountains appear across myth and in literature as symbols of endurance, revelation, and isolation. If we lean into these core themes, we can make our mountainous hexes feel a little more than just a place with elevation. They can have a little bit more meaning behind them, a little bit more story. Here are a few key ways to frame mountains thematically within your game world. Number one, mountains as symbols of challenge and endurance. Mountains can act as this sort of threshold of survival. Mountains test the limits of body and spirit. They are where mortals are humbled before nature's scale. In adventuring terms, mountains are natural gauntlets. There's thin air, there's avalanches, crumbling paths, and sudden storms, all of which can become hazards to a party trying to traverse them. Crossing them can represent a literal and symbolic ordeal for the party. Characters who endure a mountain passage often come out changed, hardened, enlightened, or broken. You can use mountain crossings as milestones in a campaign, moments where the party earns passage through their effort and determination to get to the other side. A design tip here is to really kind of emphasize your verticality, the scarcity, and the exposure that these mountains present to the party. Every moment upward in these environments should feel earned to the party, and when they pass through them, they should feel accomplished. Number two, mountains as sacred or forbidden places. Throughout history, mountains have been tied to divinity and revelation. Think of Mount Olympus or Mount Sinai, homes of gods and places of enlightenment. Mountains in your world might have holy sites, shrines, or forbidden peaks said to touch the heavens. Inversely, mountains can represent exile or divine punishment, where the gods banish their fallen or hide away terrible secrets. A ruined monastery perched above the clouds or a temple guarded by elementals can make the mountains feel otherworldly. A tip for working on these types of mountains would really be you make your elevation equal isolation. What's higher up is both harder to reach and more spiritually charged. Number three, mountains as barriers and boundaries. Mountains divide worlds. They're natural walls that separate kingdoms, cultures, and ecosystems. Crossing them is rarely just a matter of geography. It's more of a crossing of identity, language, or allegiance. In a sandbox, mountain ranges can serve as frontiers between realms or as natural fortifications hiding lost civilizations or secret valleys. You can use mountains to regulate player exploration, not as walls or blocking off content, but more as filters that demand natural preparation, skill, or alliances to cross. When designing these types of mountains, I would look to use mountain passes, tunnels, or cliffside routes as choke points for travel, adventure hooks, and encounters. Now that we have a handle on the big kind of core themes, let's talk about how those themes translate into gameplay and functional representation within our hexes. Here are a few ways to use mountains as active, functional environments within your sandbox world. Number one, the trial or ordeal. So in this case, our symbolic role is the mountains are sort of this crucible of endurance. The narrative function is to really act as a proving ground or testing ground of the characters. The characters are physically and spiritually challenged. So tools for designing these types of mountains, I would definitely build up some sort of weather tables. You're going to want to have harsh weather, and it's going to want to come up quickly and suddenly on the players, blizzards, lightning storms, things like that. You're going to want to build in dangerous ascents and, mountain collapses, could be avalanches. These sort of environmental challenges should definitely be a part of these types of mountain ranges. You could also play up or design some mechanics for minor ailments to the parties, things like starvation, frostbite, and altitude sickness. If you want to get that crunchy, those are options as well that you could look to use. I would use this type of functional representation if I want the mountains to act as an ordeal zone within my sandbox, a place where the party must kind of push beyond limits to reach, what lies beyond the mountains or atop the peaks. Number two, the divine or forbidden peak. The symbolic role in this case is to act as the sacred summit or an unreachable truth within your sandbox. Your narrative function is really to act as a quest destination or really this kind of place of lore. It's sort of this site of revelation, pilgrimage, or confrontation with the divine. It can really be kind of built up within your setting's history. Tools for designing these types of mountains, I would look to use things like ancient monasteries. You could have old hermits or, seers with prophetic insight that live on the mountains. You could use elemental forces, so air and stone spirits, and maybe even storms that act as divine guardians. You can really lean into the fantastical for these types of mountains. At the tops, I would maybe look to have magical altars or divine relics that are kind of hidden atop these unreachable cliffs. So those parties that do make these difficult ascents and find these places have these kind of mythical rewards at their peaks. I would use this type of function if I want my mountain to be this really mythical focal point within my sandbox, something that's awe-inspiring, feared or worshipped by the people within that region. Number three, the boundary or frontier. So in this case, the symbolic role is really this sort of separation of worlds. It kind of represents protection or isolationism. The narrative function in this case is sort of this physical and cultural barrier. Crossing it means entering a new land with new people and probably new conflicts. Tools for designing these types of mountain ranges, I would look to use maybe bandit forces or mountain strongholds that kind of hold the line between these two cultures or two areas. You could definitely build up lost dwarven halls or hidden passages that allow easier travel between these two areas. And then I would also use maybe things like migrating monsters that, emerge when snow melts and maybe makes travel easier, but kind of represents these challenges that sort of build up these natural barriers between these two different lands. So I would use this if you want your mountains to kind of serve as these natural borders, but they're dynamic, alive, and politically charged terrain to be used within your sandbox. Mountains host some of the most iconic and dangerous creatures in fantasy, many of which embody the same themes of dominance, solitude, and endurance that mountains do. For trial and ordeal themed mountains, I would look to use things like griffins, manticores, and giant eagles as these great aerial predators that live in the mountains. You could use things like giants, ettins, and trolls that are territorial threats guarding these high passes, and even things like winter wolves that maybe strike amid these dangerous storms that rise up. These monsters make climbing itself a survival challenge. It's really kind of showing how the mountain fights back against any that would sort of try to traverse it. For sacred or forbidden peaks, I would look to use things like stone, cloud, and storm giants. These are really kind of custodians of ancient wisdom and divine relics. Maybe rocks nesting atop these kind of unreachable summits, these great large birds. I would definitely use elementals, maybe air or earth ones, embodying kind of that spiritual presence of the peaks. And then you could also use celestial beings or avatars that might manifest near these divine sites. They really kind of turn mountains into a liminal zone between the mortal and divine realms. For the boundaries and frontiers functional representation, I would look to use dwarves, orcs, reclusive monks, all sort of living in self-sufficient mountain enclaves, could present interesting allies, enemies, or challenges that the party's going to have to deal with. I would definitely look at dragons. So red and white are kind of apex predators, but you could use any that you want. They really kind of symbolize that dominance and greed. And then you could also use other fantastical beasts, things like chimeras and basilisks, maybe lurking in caverns or cave networks that weave through the mountains, possibly guarding these kind of forgotten passageways. And you might even include mythic beasts who are tied to the mountain's geography, like a sleeping titan whose body is the mountain range. Things like that can be really fun if you want to go kind of super high fantasy on some of these elements. I would use these inhabitants not just as encounters, but really a reflection of the mountain's character, which is, of course, untamed, ancient, and immense. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how to make your mountain terrain more than just a climb. Think of mountains as trials, as holy places, or as these natural boundaries, and really lean into those core themes behind them. And of course, you can mix and match these themes to give your mountainous hexes variety and meaning. Every different peak or hex can tell a different story if you want it to. I'd love to know how you guys are using mountain ranges in your own campaigns. Do your parties climb them? Do they avoid them? Are you using them as like natural boundaries within your hex map to keep your hex a little bit more localized and sustained for you to run? If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like and subscribe, and consider checking out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.